Hello and welcome to the shed. Today's video I want to cover 4 exercises that I did when I was first starting to help improve my hand sawing, and I still use them to this day if I haven't been doing hand sawing for a while and I just need to brush up on my alignment techniques, any of that sort of thing. So let's jump in and get started. The very first exercise that we want to do is what I call air sawing, and that is just trying to perfect and get used to your technique. Because when it comes to hand sawing, we want the alignment of our shoulder, our elbow, and our wrist, and an extension with that, our pointed finger, to actually saw straight. So what I do is I grab any saw, tenon saw, dovetail saw, panel saw, and it's not a bad idea to practice all of these because the way a lighter or a longer panel saw feels when doing that versus a heavy tenon saw or even a smaller lighter gent saw, it's going to feel a little different to you. So it's a good idea to get used to doing it with all the different saws that you've got of various weights, just to get used to that and perfect that technique, because the basis of all issues when it comes to hand sawing is your technique. If your technique is not right, you're not gonna have a very good chance of sawing straight, and in my opinion, probably no chance. So it's most vital. So you can do this for a minute. You can do it like you do in the gym, a few sets, 20 seconds, a little bit of rest, and then do it again if you really want to. Or you can just do what I do, is pick it up, line everything up. I point my finger like this, and I'm concentrating on keeping everything as in alignment as I can. Just like this. And you can practice tipping over and still doing it. But when you very first start, the best way that, or this is what I did, I'm not so sure it's necessarily the best way, is you stand here and brush your elbow against your side. That's not what you want to be doing when you're sawing, but it's a good idea to get you as close to straight. So you're getting used to just brushing the inside of your elbow up against your side. Once you feel that, oh yeah, that feels right, then what you want to do is move it out just enough so your elbow actually clears your side and you're still in that straight alignment. You don't want to go right out like this. You're just out a tiny bit from your body. Not much. I sit, it's probably 20 mil out from my side, and that's normally my sawing position. If we're tensed up and locked on here, what happens when you're tensing your hand up here is you tense up your muscles in your forearm, you tense it up in your upper arm here, and then trying to saw straight it's very difficult because we're really biting down and we're going to do shorter strokes, and our alignment's going to get thrown out, and we're going to move our elbow around because our muscles are all tense. So you want to have a nice relaxed grip when doing this, and it just means that you're going to be more relaxed, it's going to be easier for you to saw, and you're going to be more likely to keep yourself in alignment. And that's why a lot of people say don't grip down hard on the saw, because you grip down hard on that saw and it just makes things that much harder for you to do, because you have, I know it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but you actually have less control over the saw when you're gripping down really tight and hard on it. The saw knows what it's doing. It's going to saw straight. As long as you've sharpened it, and I'll leave a couple links down to where I've done that, and you're making sure it's all running true, the saw is going to want to go straight, so you just need to support it and allow it to do the work and not tell it what to do. So now we've done that for a minute or two, we can now concentrate on what also improves your accuracy, and that is sawing in less strokes. So you want to make sure, if you've got a saw like this, you want to make sure that you're doing an entire pass. Even if it's going to come up to the handle and you're doing it from here, whatever a full pass is for the saw for what it is that you're doing, you want to make sure you're using that saw, because every pass you do is more likely to throw your alignment out. And so if we're doing long strokes, we're also going to do it in less time. We're going to be more accurate as it happens, because we're not doing these little short ones. And so that's the next exercise that I like to do, is making sure that you're taking full saw strokes. So let's jump down to the vise and I'll show you this one. So once again with this exercise, it does help to use various length saws, whether 250 mil, 300 mil is the longest I've got in a gent saw, and also in a tenon saw I've got the 300 and the 250. Now this technique is also something that you can practice with your panel saw as well. Whether that is in a rip cut and a cross cut, you still want to be using the full length. Now, what I'm going to show you here is just up with the tenon saw, because it's going to give you a good idea, and this is where you're looking for your most accuracy. Panel saw is not necessarily your most accurate saw, and it's not intended to be, so I find that although it's nice to know with the panel saw, it's really the most valuable when it comes to your back saws and the saws that you're going to be doing your joinery with, because that's where all your accuracy is. I'm going to start with my tenon saw here. So you want to be practicing sawing all the way through. Now, to start this, you can just hold it on the top like this, and you want to practice being able to saw all the way through like this. So you can actually just start it on the top like this and just practice. If it's a shorter saw like the gent saw here, you still want to practice. You can see there, I went off the edge a little bit, and so going from a longer saw to a shorter saw, you do kind of have to get used to what you're doing with it, and that's why this technique is good to practice with both saw types if you're using both. If you do have both or longer saws, it does mean that you're going to be a little more accurate in your dovetailing and that if you've got a longer dovetail saw, in my opinion. But like the Spear and Jackson that we converted here in the video, this 250mm is more than enough for a dovetail saw, but if you do have some longer ones, they're also good and can improve your accuracy because of the longer plate. You saw me sit here and I just started like this on the push stroke. Now, a couple of things to look out for. If you've got too much weight on the start here, it's much harder. You can't just start it. And so practicing that full stroke, you need to be making sure that you're using the horns on the saw, you're actually taking the weight like this. Obviously we're still keeping our full alignment, but you want to be making sure that you're not squeezing the handle really hard like I mentioned before, because that's going to add inaccuracies that we don't want. But in holding that loose, you also need to make sure when you start that you're holding the weight back here. So you can see how I'm holding this. Naturally like this, the angle sort of sits up slightly, which means it's taking the weight off the toe and sort of putting it back through the middle part of the saw, and that allows you to start much easier like this. So once again, if you've got too much weight down here, you're not going to start. If you've got too much weight just in general, or you're pushing down on the saw like this, it's not going to start. These teeth, although when I sawed this, I did them as relaxed teeth start easier. Those teeth, if you push down too hard, especially on end grain like this, on a softwood, where it's exposed, it's going to get inside those fibres, it's going to jam, and you're going to very much struggle to saw with it. And so in doing this, you're more likely to do something like this with these much shorter strokes, because there's a lot of weight on it, and so trying to push in, it captures the hot weight, and so using the full length of your saw is going to be difficult. Even more so when you go to a heavier saw. And so it's vital that you let the saw do the work. I've got very little weight on this at the moment. In actual fact, I can take my fingers off like this, and you can practice doing it this way. So we can see here, I've got these fingers all off, so I'm holding this finger here, and it's resting like this. So you should be able to hold your saw like this. That's why it's vital to have your saw with these horns, more so on the back saws and your dovetail saws than it is on your panel saws, but this technique still works on your panel saws as well. And so in this position, it's a little harder to actually keep it straight, but you can see we can still do that exercise, because really to keep it straight you need that finger pointed. But you want to know that your weight is on this top finger and on the horn here. And so when doing that particular one where you take the weight off, try and find your largest tenon saw with your heaviest brass back, And just practice being able to do this by taking that weight off. And once you've mastered it with your heavier saw, it's going to be no trouble with your lighter saws. It's going to be so much easier. So with those two exercises out of the way that help us to use correct technique, hold the saw correctly, use the full length of the saw, and make sure we're not putting too much weight on it to make those two things work properly. We're now ready to try and saw some lines and run through some techniques that are going to help you improve your sawing. And I still do both of these if I feel like I'm a little out of form, or I haven't done dovetailing for a little bit and I have to do a video or do some dovetails. I like to do this next technique. Although it seems a little counterintuitive, it does improve your technique with a back saw. So let's jump in here and I'll show you what we do. So you can see here I've run 3 straight lines. I've got them coming in on my side as well, and I'm going to try and show you both my perspective and this front perspective at the same time. So with this, we want to start our sawing and we want to follow this line. So the very first thing is to do our full stroke on the top. So we can start on the top here, take that weight off, push through with that full stroke, and we've established. Then what we want to do is obviously follow the line. You can see we've followed the line there. Now the next step I like to do is come across here and we'll go on our second line. So at this point, we've done practically what we were doing before, but we've followed a line and we're trying to follow it and keep ourselves straight. Now, don't get too disillusioned if you don't keep it 100% straight here, because this is practicing. You're going to get better over time. So what the exercise now is what I call the exercise of halves. So I'm going to roughly eyeball the center. And I'm going to come down the depth of my saw. If you've got a really deep saw, you don't really need to, because generally you're not going to come down this deep in most of your joinery and dovetails. It's probably only coming down this far, so it's a good idea to learn going down further here, because it's going to improve your accuracy. And then I choose another one here and do halves again. And then we choose again half. And you can start seeing how straight you're going to be to do this. And then you can come into a narrow one again. Now I think that's a little bridge too far for this particular saw. Maybe this one here. If you've got a really fine saw, so I keep falling off to the side, which means these are probably a little too narrow, but we can go on this one. How many times can you break the piece before you snap it off or run off like I did there? And so by having that first line that is a pencil line here, every time you come down you can try and see how square you are to those lines and just improve your accuracy. And the more accurate you are, and if you have a fine saw, you might be able to even go through these fine ones. And you see I still went off to the side there, so when you get down to these very narrow ones, it is easy for your saw to pull off one side or the other. Your technique gets off a little bit, but generally we're not sawing things that close together. The whole idea of this technique is to get you sawing straight. And the more you break that gap up, you can see where you're tailing off with your technique. Maybe your shoulder's going out slightly, or your elbow's moving slightly, or you're twisting the wrist a little bit more to one side, favoring one side or the other slightly. And so you can start picking up by doing this exercise regularly where you're making your issues, or where you've got a few issues or some areas you might need to improve. So now I want to move on to my fourth exercise here. Now, if you've got a thicker board like this, you can actually still practice this initially doing the same technique that we just did with splitting the line here. Now, with this technique, it's getting you used to, and you essentially do it with this, but it's getting you used to sawing a line that are on two different angles and not in the same alignment, just like you would have with a dovetail. Now, on a wider board like this, it's going to exacerbate your techniques to ensure that you're sawing straight and then following your angle. So to do this, we still only saw one angle at a time if it makes sense, and don't try to do both at the same time, though there are some times where you will have to do both at the same time, and that's kind of a little bit out of the scope of this, but this technique will allow you to do different angles but concentrating on one angle at a time. So when doing this, more than with your other tests, although it's still a good idea to do that with your other tests, is try and get your workpiece as upright as possible to start here. So what I've done is run a straight line across the top, and we've got an angle of one side of a dovetail. And so you actually want to practice this going both ways, because sometimes you're a little bit stronger on your favoured side versus your least favoured side. So to start with, and I'm actually not going to use, I'm going to use my tenon saw for this because this is a wider board. So we want to start, and we want to do that stroke all the way through on the top like I mentioned. So I did that a couple of times. So now we've got a straight line across the top here. You can come in and double check, make sure you got it square, because that's vital. That's the most important part. So now we want to angle this. So obviously I'm not going to do it on your side, you'll do it on your own side. So now we're going to match our saw to the angle. So I've gone from here over to here, and if I had it like that, you can kind of mimic and see where it would sit. Now you can create a guide block for this, but this is all about improving your freehand sawing. So now that we're straight across, the saw is going to continue to run straight across the top, and we can concentrate on this angle here. So what I've done now, you can see that the saw is up on a big angle here, it's angled down. Now the reason for this is angling a saw in the kerf is going to keep more engagement of the kerf and actually keep the saw straighter. So we can angle first. Okay, now we've got to our baseline, say our baseline's down here somewhere. We now can come back up here, and we've got this angle, and you can see the saw is held at the angle that it's meant to be now, because we've established on that line it's square across, and it's held right where we want it, so now we can just finish it off. So what I do in both those directions is do that half a dozen times each way, each time you do this, and you're slowly going to improve your accuracy, because even doing this exercise, and that's why I like doing it, is make sure you're holding the saw straight, and make sure you're taking the weight off to get a full saw length cut, and also running one angle into another angle, doing one at a time, and concentrating just on one angle at a time, and to get your accuracy there. So I find that this is a really good exercise, especially with the dovetails on a wider board, because it just exacerbates everything and means that you need to concentrate a little bit more. Now, we're obviously doing a dovetail here, and okay, this is a wide board. This is about 50 mil wide, which is wider than most dovetails you would do, but in some situations you might do it. But what if we're working in this direction? We need to keep ourselves dead accurate going across the wider board, and so once again there's another technique you can do, and that's just practicing sawing instead of across the board, widthways across your board like this, and that means you're going to be exacerbating the width even more. So if you want to practice with it straight, or if you want to practice with it on an angle like this, which I find is the easiest way, because you can just saw flat across two lines this way and watch both of these at the same time. But for ease of you seeing what I'm up to, we're going to put it this way around. And once again, get it as get it as upright as you can here. Grab a marking gauge, run a few like this, run them right through on both sides. Now, when starting this, you can start on your line on this side and nibble it like this, or you can start it on this side and nibble it like this. I prefer to start on this side because I can kind of just run straight through. But for you to see this, we're going to start here, nibble with a couple of small strokes, and then we're going to slowly drop the saw, narrow and gaze straight across, and you can even go down that side here. So we'll, just like before, we've already done the front, so we can concentrate on this angle, and the saw's going to do what it wants. And we'll do it this way, and then we can just fill the two in. So now I've got this sitting in a more practical way. We see this corner here. Put your finger here. If you're doing a second class saw cut, you'd put a little notch on this corner here. But for this, we're not going to do that. So we're practicing our technique. So we're going to put our finger where we want it. So when the saw plate sits here, we can move it across and we can line it up where we want it. And then we're going to do one full stroke through. You can see on this corner here, we've sawn straight on both of them on that corner. We've not had to angle it, we've kept it straight. We've angled our board instead. Now, with this, you could go on both at the same time, keep going like this, and watch both. Or you can concentrate on one, like the top one here. Once we've got that nibbled, then you can come back here and it'll just follow it. And so then we've gone from this corner to this corner. Pick it up, we'll turn it around. We've already got it established on that top here, so we'll come back into that corner. And we continue sawing, and we just follow everything. And so there's the two ways of doing that, and I like to practice both of them because one of them is obviously just like doing your dovetail but square, or your multi-cut technique, but over a wider area. It's much harder to cut across there and keep it accurate. And then there's doing the angles and practicing cutting on two angles at the same time, or following one and then the other. And I think they're all vital to learn, because in various situations you're not necessarily always going to be able to do it the way that you want. So there you have it, folks. They're 4 exercises that I found myself doing a lot when I first started, just to improve my technique with the saw. Whether it's a panel saw, whether it's a back saw, a heavier one or a lighter one, I think it's important to practice with all your saws, so when you come to need to use them, you're going to be a lot more accurate. And it doesn't stop you from doing these quick little exercises, practicing for a minute or two on each one of them just before you start doing a project. If you're doing some dovetails, some little quick strokes to just practice that you're actually using full stroke and you're going to be accurate when you come to your project. I think it's a vital technique, and I still use it all the time when I haven't done dovetails for a while in particular, or if I feel like I'm getting a little off with my angles and the saw's pulling to the side a little bit and I know my saws are actually working fine. And so doing these little techniques where you're sawing really close to each other and practicing keeping it straight, I think is a good technique even to brush up your skills for someone who's been doing it for a while. I think it's also vital to know that very last one, especially if you're doing a lot of tenons or even half laps where you're sawing cheeks off, it's vital to practice being able to saw 2 different lines, whether it's at the same time or individually, which is very similar to obviously doing a dovetail like this. But across a wider board it is much harder to keep that accuracy, and that's why I think it's vital to practice going in the rip cut across a really wide board, a thicker board, and also thinner boards, just to get used to doing all of them. And so it's good just to have a few bits of scrap of that lying around just for these particular exercises, in my opinion. So if you like this video, please do like and subscribe down below. While you're down there, please do sound off in the comments if you've used any of these exercises. Are there any other exercises that you might recommend to the beginner that I haven't done here that you felt was vital for your success and learning to handsaw. Even if you're a beginner and you've got some great little exercise that you do that helps you, do leave it down below. We might share it with everyone if it's a good enough technique, and if I find it works for me, I'm going to share it with the rest of you. So do leave them down below. And if you'd like to see another great video such as the one you've seen here today, do check out the video up here, which is the 3 classes of saw cuts that Robert Waring brought to woodworking and how they might improve and help these techniques that we've done here today. Bye for now.